7 quick tips on how to observe like Kiyotaka Ayanokoji. Examine social dynamics. You should get in the habit of actively observing the interactions between people. These social dynamics are often not observed by most people, so they miss out on gaining valuable information. But Ayanokoji doesn't neglect this and actually takes the time to observe these social interactions, which is something that you can easily replicate. For example, let's take a look at this social encounter that Ayanokoji was observing. When examining this, you can establish that there's hostility between Sudo and Wiyuan, as they're using aggressive insults towards each other. We also have Ichi-no-se that goes out of her way to stop the fight from happening. Based on this, you can establish her as selfless and is not the type of person to incite violence. These are just a few social dynamics that you can notice. There's many other things to observe, such as who's in a dominant position, the cause of the conflict, their feelings for specific individuals, their motives, and much more. Basically, just by analyzing social situations, you will learn a lot about each individual and their relationships with certain people. Notice different behavior. Recognizing when someone is behaving differently than before is an important part of observation. If you actually pay attention to these changes, it can give you clues and knowledge on their individual psychology. Firstly, you must establish how they normally behave by analyzing the person in many different situations. This is so you can understand their baseline to make it easier to spot their different behavior. For example, when first meeting Horikita, you can establish her normal behavior as serious, cold, and distant. She also seems to be quite composed. However, her behavior becomes significantly different when around her brother, specifically becoming more emotional and sensitive. When you observe this deviation, you can gain valuable information on her by analyzing why she's behaving like this around her brother. In this case, the reason for her different behavior is because she deeply desires approval and praise from her brother. This is something that Ayanokoji noticed, and if you make it a habit to recognize changes in behavior, you will improve your observing abilities. Read their nonverbals. If you don't observe the nonverbals of a person, you miss out on a significant amount of information, which is why you should take the time to learn nonverbal communication. This includes gestures, body movement, facial expressions, posture and eye contact. Remember that humans are always transmitting information. Most people just fail to observe these things. Body language is quite an extensive topic, so I recommend you read a book on body language to get all the details. But here, I will be giving a few quick examples to give you a better idea on observing nonverbals. One body language sign to observe is chin touching. This is normally done with the tips of the fingers, which indicates the person is thinking, contemplating, or evaluating something. So when you see this nonverbal, it means the person is processing information. Another nonverbal sign is the palms up display. It's where the person's palm is facing up towards the sky. It indicates compliance, humility or cooperation. It's also a universal way of saying that they have nothing to hide and their hands are clean. Also, one more thing that you can observe is the freeze response. This is where a person is having little to no movement, which often means that the person feels threatened and uncomfortable. People who are relaxed will have more fluid and smoother movement, but this is not the case with Sakura. She's frozen in place, along with having stiff and shaky movement. It's something that you should look out for, so you know when somebody is in a mental state of stress. Ayanokoji was able to notice this just by reading her nonverbals, allowing him to clearly understand that this specific individual is making her feel extreme discomfort. So if you put in the time and effort to learn all these nonverbal signs, you'll become a good observer just like Ayanokoji. Eliminate bias when observing. It's best to not have any bias when you're observing. This is because an unbiased perspective allows you to make accurate observations. However, this is harder to develop than you might think, because everyone has their own personal feelings, opinions, and beliefs, which can get in the way of you making good observations. For instance, if you're observing someone that you don't like, you'll be more inclined to notice only their negative qualities. These personal feelings and emotions affect your perception, which leads you to inaccurate conclusions. The first step to becoming unbiased is to be aware of your own biases. Recognize the preconceptions that you may have so that you prevent them from affecting your observations. Along with that, you should avoid being judgmental, because it's essentially pushing your own feelings and opinions onto whatever you're observing. Look at things from a neutral viewpoint, which means you don't form an opinion on someone or something. You operate with an open mind, so you just see it exactly as it is. If you can do this, then you will be able to observe everything objectively. Like Ayanokoji, connect your observations. Once you make multiple observations, you can start connecting them all together to build a bigger picture. This is essential in deduction, where you need to come to a conclusion after observing many different things. You're basically thinking about one observation and seeing if it relates to another observation you made before. One example that we can look at is from the deserted island test. This is where Ayanokoji connected all his observations to figure out the truth. These are some observations that you can establish if you were in Ayanokoji's position. One observation by itself doesn't provide much information, but if you look at all of them together, you can see what you observed before is related to each other. This is essentially how Ayanokoji connects his observations to deduce to a conclusion, allowing him to figure out that the Class C members are spying for their own class. If you can link observations like this, you will find information that was not so obvious before. Determine their character. The qualities of a person is something that you should consider in your observations. If you can read their character, you will be able to assess their strengths, weaknesses, and capabilities. Keep in mind, when determining their character, you should specifically observe their actions. People can say anything, but their actions shows their true qualities. Here are some things that you can observe when determining their character. The habits they have. Look out for something that a person consistently keeps doing because it provides valuable knowledge on who they are. They might have a habit of showing up late, never completing their work, or perhaps they always take responsibility for something. People usually don't do things just once and will often have compulsive patterns. How they operate under stress. People's flaws become more apparent when in a stressful situation, which makes it a great opportunity to figure out their character. Often they will reveal their weakness and insecurities. Or in rare occasions, specific individuals can thrive and reveal their strength when under stress. How they behave in a different environment. People like to present themselves in a certain way when around specific people, which is why you won't be able to observe everything in just one situation. Observe a person when they're away from a work environment or school environment. This will allow you to discover a different side to them. By considering these things, you will be able to observe and determine a person's character more accurately. Never make assumptions. Assumptions is something that you should never do when you're observing, because it leads you to inaccurate conclusions. To prevent this from happening, you must collect a sufficient amount of data before forming a conclusion on someone. You can do this by observing a person in different situations over a longer period of time. This will be significantly better than trying to form a conclusion from your first impressions of someone. For example, you may assume that Kushida is a nice person when you first meet her, but realize first impressions can often be inaccurate because you haven't seen the individual in different situations. If you stopped yourself from assuming and took your time observing her, you would eventually find out her true personality. You should also not rely on one observation to make a conclusion. It's best to have multiple observations that would confirm if something is true. If you can do this, you will stop yourself from making assumptions and you will become a more logical observer. Thanks for watching VevenSeven.